Thank you very much, Pavel, for the introduction. Can everyone hear me well, or should I put it closer? Yes. Okay, even in the back. Perfect. Cool. I'm Andrej. Hello, everyone. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Birdwingo. It's an easy-to-use investing app for Gen Z and millennials in Europe and beyond. We are launching next week, or in approximately 10 to 14 days. And what I want to talk to you about is our product journey. So to talk a little bit more about how we approach products, so what we look at, what is important for us, what pitfalls we've discovered, and I wanna walk you through two hypotheses that we've been sort of building and that we are constantly testing. One is basically the hypothesis that you want to be building at all cost a user-centric product, so talk to users at every single point. The second hypothesis is maybe somewhat less common, and that is building a product that is mission-driven. So this is extremely important to us as a company. This is also extremely important to me personally. I'll get to it. So maybe you may be wondering why am I here specifically, and maybe that is also fair to sort of point this out in the beginning. There is a connection with Vacuumlabs, so I'm very good friends with Maciej Wdachnik, the CEO, and Vacuumlabs, or Maciej, is actually mentoring us, so he's helping us quite a lot with the strategy, with the product, with partnerships, development, and so on. I've actually just returned from a trip to Italy with Maciej and a couple of friends. It was cool, but it's actually pretty cold there as well, so we were expecting to have a nice, warm workation from there, but not really. So don't recommend going there in sort of late September. Cool, so as I mentioned, the agenda for the next couple of minutes. First, I'll very quickly introduce myself and the company. I will then walk you through how we approach products at the moment, and then I'll walk through two hypotheses that we have. So one is the focusing on user-centric product when doing anything sort of product related. The second one is building a product with a mission, with very clear mission. So let me start. So my journey, I'm originally from Slovakia, but I haven't lived there for quite some time. I lived in the US, then I studied in London and the Netherlands, before moving back to London, where I worked as a strategy consultant. So basically working with all these like super boring big companies and advising them on strategy, advising them on ESG, on sort of market entry and so on, and then moving to Germany to work for E.ON as a in-house consultant, so advising the management, especially on topics around ESG or sort of cost optimizations and so on, and then eventually going to or start co-founding Birdwingo with my co-founder and brother actually, and so this is my journey. We can also get to it a bit more later, but what is important to say is in terms of how we started Birdwingo. There are a couple of things, and this is, to me, this is quite interesting because many times companies start from like a very serious user problem, and it was also in our case. So what we've discovered was I was sort of at that point working in Germany. I was not super happy with sort of my work at that moment because it's sort of like you can imagine like big corporations and things not being super dynamic and so on. Adam was working from Barbados for this startup, so he was living his life, but he was still sort of thinking that like, yeah, actually let's do something interesting. Let's do something that will make like all of us a bit more happy. Let's have something that brings like societal, like positive societal impact, which has been really important for both of us. And as I was moving countries quite a lot, like once I traveled with this sort of driver from Slovakia all the way to Germany, and since the road is like pretty long and so on, you try to like get to know each other and so on. And we started talking about investing and how he sort of like thought of like betting and investing and so on. And for him personally, investing was mostly about sort of like betting on sports. So betting if like this player will actually score, or if like this team will win or not. And he would always be like, hey, like, yeah, I'm actually making like so much money on this. I was like, oh, okay. And my consulting mind was like, okay, let me check this. And so I asked him like, okay, because he was like, yeah, actually like last month I made like 1,000 euros. I was like, whoa, that's pretty nice. And then he was like, and then I was like, okay, so what's like your overall P&L for like this year? Because I was just like, my consulting mind, I was a bit curious. And he was like, yeah, so I'm actually like 2-point-something K euros like down this year. And I was like, so there's the catch. And so like this brought me to think about like, oh, so why are we sort of, as a society, why are we, I would say, giving options to people to sort of like look at, to go into this like super gambling betting propositions, where like in most cases they actually lose money. And it's like, let's actually give them this like feeling of like this adrenaline rush and so on, so that like they don't have to be doing like the betting where like on every euro that you bet you're most likely gonna lose, but let's actually give them something where they can actually win. And that brought me to like thinking like, okay, let's actually bring like something that already works in the US or in Western Europe, such as Robinhood, into Central and Eastern Europe. And that is how Birdwingo came about. So this was the initial idea, and we started focusing on this one. So now I'll tell you how we sort of like approach products and why we believe that approaching it, especially from the mission-driven perspective, actually makes a lot of sense. We are not trying to reinvent the wheel, and I would also recommend everyone who's working on product or actually on anything in startups to not try to reinvent the wheel. It's not, if you can follow someone or like an entity which already does things great, then I would definitely suggest that you do so. For me personally, this has been Y Combinator. So I've been a big fan of Y Combinator and a couple of other other companies doing great things. And so whenever possible, especially when it comes to products, especially when it comes to processes and so on, we don't try to reinvent the wheel, but we take what already works. One of those is Y Combinator product approach. So some of the things that we do is we actually look at, so this is just like a summary of some of the things that we actually tried out, and it's a lot about experiments, and for each team, a different thing may work out, may not work out, so you basically need to see for yourself. There's also the time element, so some things may work out initially, then they stop working out, and you have to be very agile. Some people hate it, some people love it. You have to love it, otherwise it will not work. So one thing that I would maybe flag out is we really like to do product sessions in a wider round of the team, where basically so we always have someone who's a product meeting leader. The person then, he or she prepares the meeting, and then what we do is we basically go over ideas. So we do this like crazy brainstorming on any feature that we do based on sort of like the research that we've done on the users. And then based on this, we somehow sort of like then the product leader then chooses certain functionalities or certain things to implement. So this has been working very fine for us. And this is how we sort of like move things forward even before we move them to the development. Any questions so far about like anything that we've discussed? There will be room for questions also at the end, or when we have beers. Cool. So, 2 hypotheses that I wanted to cover. One is user-centricity. That is extremely important for any product. And this is something that Y Combinator will tell you. This is something that like any other good company will tell you. Airbnb is heavily driven by this, as well as Brex, as well as many other sort of Uber, as well as other companies. So what you got to do is you have to speak to the users at every single point. So try to, or like this is something that worked very well for us, is if you have users who, these like super users, who really love talking to you and who love giving you feedback even if you don't pay them. So like that is something that is important. We've tried paying users, we've tried sort of like not paying users. Both approaches are fine, but the users that really love you and your product and want to be part of your journey, you have to enable them to be part of the journey. Will give you the feedback anyways, because they really want to be part of something bigger. So especially Revolut, just to let you know, used to have this sort of a group of 1,000 beta testers. These were people who were unpaid. They were doing quite a lot of work for the company, and they still were not paid, and basically just were paid with the good feeling of being part of something bigger and being able to like be there from the very beginning of the company journey. So this is something that has been also important to us. So initially you start with the pain point, or like in our case, the pain point discovery and analysis. So what we started doing was, in any investing app, I don't know how many of you actually invest. I would actually be curious, hands up, who invests? Okay, so quite a lot of people. So I'd say based on sort of like very quick look, it looks like 60, 65, 70%. So that's actually much more than the average. Does anyone know what the European average is for adult population? Any guesses?
10%.
It's actually, someone mentioned 15. It's actually 15%. So just 15% of people in Europe invest into anything, whether that are stocks, ETFs, crypto, whatever, shoes, whatever. So it's crazy, especially if you compare it to the US, where the number is actually over half of the population, of the adult population. Many reasons for this, but you can imagine that especially in Central and Eastern Europe, it's also connected to, most likely to communism, most likely to sort of like the turbulent 90s, when you have a lot of like scam and so on, and people are a bit more vigilant. Which of course is changing now, especially when young people, Gen Zers and millennials, are becoming a bit more accustomed to sort of like new technology and trusting maybe things that are also, that do not have a brick and mortar store and so on. But to me it was very shocking. So in any investing, you have like basically, or this is how we approached it. You have 3 main customer segments. One are professional investors. The second one, we call them semi-professional investors, and the third are beginners. Professional investors focus on this like daily. So they do day trading, they need really a lot of sort of professional tools in terms of the analysis, super rigorous analysis, super rigorous graphs, and so on. We always looked at the pain points. We always tried to figure out like what your pain point. Tell me, like what is the pain point that you sort of like have? So this is what we would ask the professional, semi-professional, and beginner investors. For professional investors, it would most likely be something around like, hey, like I don't know, or like, hey, like the costs are actually still pretty high, and like I'm trying to optimize for my profit, and like this is super high. And they were not really bothered by many other things. Like they needed to have like really sophisticated sort of graphs. They really needed to have like a lot of financial instruments, because some people wanted to trade futures, some wanted to trade CFDs, some wanted something else, margin trading and so on. And that's when you realize that like, oh, so maybe this is like, maybe you don't want to be building something for like these people because the solutions are already there. Like if you're a professional investor who looks at it on a daily basis, like first of all, most likely you're gonna lose money, especially with CFDs. Second of all, like some options are already there. Then we looked at like, okay, well, maybe this is not really like a path forward. So we looked at the semi-professional and beginner investors. So semi-professional investors are people who know what they want to invest in. So let's say it's like S&P 500 ETF from Vanguard. So most people know this, and they're like, yeah, actually this is like an ETF that like I could like invest in, and it makes sense to me because like I can deposit on a monthly basis hundreds of euros or dozens of euros or thousands of euros, and basically get some sort of a benefit from it, like in the long run. These people were usually optimizing for costs as well as sort of like, usually they know what they want to invest in, and they're just looking for like a right tool that is like secure and so on. And we thought like, okay, this could be interesting, and we started building the proposition for them as well. But then we looked at the beginner population, and like beginners, so we defined them as customers who have never invested before, or who have invested before but do not feel like super comfortable with what they're doing. Or even they may feel comfortable, but they still want some extra knowledge. They still want to know a bit more. And when we looked at the numbers, and I told you that 85% of the European population actually doesn't invest, so those people would fall into the category of beginners. For us, it was like pretty clear. Like the proposition that we were able to provide was actually catering to the beginner population. So beginners were those who actually, for them, when we were doing the pain point discovery, we found out that actually beginners don't really know what to do in the first place. They don't talk about costs. They have no clue usually what the costs are. They really cared about like, okay, so where do I start? Why is it all so complicated? I have no clue what market cap is. I have no clue what the PE ratio is and so on. Why are you guys using like so much jargon? Like this is so putting me off. And so we were like, oh, so actually, let's focus on these ones, and let's develop an investing app that actually helps people who are not professionals to sort of like get onto the investing journey, just as some of the other people can do, especially in the US. So this was for us a very clear way forward after a lot of sort of brainstorming and thinking how to approach it. And this is how we then started building the product. So you pinpoint the target customer, you know exactly what they want, you know exactly who they are. You can put there, if you don't know how else to do this, you can put a picture of them, of a random person with like the specific characteristics of your person, of your target customer, above your toilet seat or like above your bed or wherever you want, wherever it will work, just so that it's like always on your eyes, and so that you can sort of like always see them. And you start building for them, and you disregard everyone else, because no product is made for everyone. And this was something that like for me was very difficult to realize, but this is the only way forward if you want to build a product that actually scales in the long run. Down the road, you start including more and more customer segments, but you got to start with a super niche segment to which you basically give everything that you have in terms of product, in terms of customer support, in terms of the marketing messaging, and so on. And for us, it was sort of these beginner investors and sort of some people who also invest, but do not do it on a regular or sort of on a daily basis, who are not sort of like gamblers. Cool. So this was the hypothesis number one. The other thing that I wanted to touch upon is building a product or products that have a mission very strongly embedded in them. What I mean by this is, I believe, and this is also to some extent being more and more backed by data, which I honestly really love, data and also the fact that it's been backed by it, that you got to build products that have some sort of a mission in them. So it's not just about making money. It's not just about like your EBITDA. It's not just about sort of like your revenue or anything else. You have to have some sort of a product that transcends this and that like allows people to feel that they are part of something that is bigger. And this was also super important for me personally. And that is why I decided to quit my job in Germany and come to Prague, where I actually live at the moment, and build this. Is, for me, something that has always been extremely important, ever since I was like 15, was building products or doing things in general that have positive societal impact. And whether those are non-profits or sort of like businesses or anything else, this was really important for me. And so how we do this, one sec. Cool. So how we do this, I think like if you want to do it properly, and this is sort of like all based on the experience that we have had so far, is that you have to embed it across your whole organization. So it's not enough to put it in your mission statement. It's not enough to just like communicate it. You have to do it from the very beginning and you have to do it everywhere. So what I mean by this, a couple of points. First, it starts with hiring. So it very much, the team that you built in your company very much determines what sort of values and what sort of product values of the product your product will actually have. So and this is also what I borrowed from Y Combinator, you got to hire people who are passionate about the product, who are passionate about the mission, instead of mercenaries. So instead of people who just focus on the money, whether those are stock options or sort of cash or any other form of compensation, but you got to build people who are willing to put in the hours, who are willing to sort of like take the project as their own, and then try to move it forward. Secondly, once you have these sort of people, and it's very difficult to find them, you got to retain them, and you got to really focus on how you retain them properly. So one thing that really worked very well for us, I would say, is showing people that we really care about what we're building. So when I really show them that, look guys, but like this does have a super big positive social impact on the beginner investors who have never invested before and who can now start saving. It doesn't matter if it's 10 euros or whatever, 300, 500 Czech koruna into ETFs or into anything else. It's important that they start somewhere and that they grow. And this will have an extreme positive impact on their lives going forward. Once people started understanding this, once people started using the app themselves, especially in the internal team and also their friends, they realized that this has really a lot of positive impact and that they are changing a lot of things for the better. And this brings back the motivational aspect. When people can do this, the product at the end really wins because people are more keen to sort of like get it better and better, to make it better and better. Of course, this must be embedded in the product itself. So what we do, on top of the fact that we're actually cheapest in the Central and Eastern European region when it comes to investing in ETFs and stocks, we also donate 10% of the proceeds to charities. And this is, some people may find this like a bit like counterintuitive, because they would think that like, oh, but like, guys, like you have to be making money and then like redistributing the money to shareholders and so on. The thing is that like you really want to create a love brand. You really want to create a brand that people are willing to stand by and are willing to defend. And this will also help you, to be honest, when it comes to any bugs that you face. And you will always, and we have faced a lot of bugs. There were issues initially with people not being able to register, people not being able to top up their accounts, or sort of buy things and so on. Many buttons not working and so on. And people in these initial phases are willing to forgive you, and basically are willing to be totally fine with it when you show them that you are actually a good company that they should care about, and that you actually do a lot of positive societal impact from the activities that you do. So this has been extremely important for us. There is a saying that it's better to build the first 1,000 users who really love you than to build 10,000 users who sort of like you. This has been the story of Revolut. This has been the story of Uber, Lyft, Airbnb, and many others. And this is basically a playbook that really works. So anyone building products, this is something that, from my humble personal experience, this is something that was probably sort of like the most important thing. Cool. So this is how we sort of approach product in general. I would then, so maybe very quickly to summarize. So what has been really important for us are two things. One, building a product that is user-centric. So really focus at every stage of your product discovery, product development journey to do things that people love. And so there is no way around this. You've got to sort of focus on this, and you got to make sure that what you do is something that sort of people really love. Otherwise, you will find out that you're developing something that like no one actually wants to use. So better not do it. The second thing is to be mission driven. So for us, as I mentioned, especially these younger people. So how we define younger people, 18 to 35, because you cannot invest if you're under 18. They really care about societal impacts. And this is something that is changing. So for people, it's no longer around just like the profits, but it's also around what I actually invest in can have really great impact on sort of like the society as a whole. So for example, if you invest in stocks of companies that have not withdrawn from Russia, to some extent, some people feel, me included, that they are supporting or sort of like helping the regime a bit. If you invest in stocks or ETFs that invest in companies that support fossil fuels, what actually works, how the mechanism works, and I know this because I used to work with managements, sort of like top-level managements in these big corporations. Their access to capital is easier, which makes their operations easier. If all of these retail investors don't invest in, let's say, fossil fuel companies or companies selling weapons to Saudi Arabia, what happens is that these companies need to look for funding somewhere else, and it becomes much more expensive for them. And so this is one of the things. Some of our users report to us that they really love the feature that we have, that they can invest in companies which support LGBT rights, or companies that support, that are led by women. And all of these things are, of course, super, super important. And also, if you think about it, or if you look at it sort of like in the long run, many times either on the micro level or even on the macro level, many times these sort of companies that are diverse and that sort of like are ESG friendly and so on tend to outperform the old-fashioned fossil fuel companies, or sort of like the old-fashioned other sector companies that do not sort of diversify their workforce and so on. So maybe one last thing that I would love to mention is we love to give opportunities to people who maybe are not, who don't think this is for them. And that comes to sort of like the beginner investor, and that comes to also sort of like what we do internally. And so maybe some of you may be surprised, but female investors, which are actually pretty much underrepresented, tend to earn 0.4% more on an annualized basis than male investors. And for me, this was super interesting. And then I was like, wow, but like, if this is so, why is it so that female investors are actually so hugely underrepresented and feel like investing is not for them in the first place, and that the male person, either in the household, if it's a heterosexual household or somewhere else, should be taking care of this. So no, anyone can do it, and the thing is that it's good to start as soon as possible. So I would sort of end it here. If you guys have any questions, feel free to shoot them. And thanks a lot for your attention.
Hi. You mentioned the beginners as your like audience. What about the competitors? Because you mentioned 85% of the people in Europe does invest, so I imagine that also many other companies are trying to bite this huge cake. So did you also did some research on the competitor side, or of course on the user side as well?
Our biggest competitor, and thanks for the question, is actually inactivity. So we're fighting people who decide to not do anything and with their money. And so this is sort of like the biggest pool of users that we focus on, are people who actually have the money, or like it doesn't matter, it can be 20 euros per month, and we just want to convert them into users who try it out on a monthly basis. Try it for 6 months with 20 euros and see if you like it. If you like it, you sort of like see that like, okay, this is making sense to me. I want to be doing it. And then I increase it to 50. Then I increase it to 100 and so on. There are a couple of global competitors, not many competitors in Europe, global competitors. There is an investing app in the United States that is very much focused on beginner investors and also on female investors, which is also a sub-segment that we focus on, not solely, but also on female investors. There is an investing app in London as well that started focusing on beginners, but at the moment there isn't an investing app or sort of any sort of investing solution that is primarily targeting the 85% of people who do not invest. If there are no more questions, or feel free to also sort of email me or ask me privately. And I guess thanks a lot for inviting me. Thanks a lot for your attention. I'll stick around, so if you want to ask me privately, you can also stop by. Thanks.